Hello and welcome to Math World. Today we're going to talk about regression analysis. So this is a new unit and we're going to get to see linear functions used a little bit differently. So in the past we've seen linear functions that kind of were lined up perfectly. We would have one plot, another plot, and another plot, and we could make a nice line to connect them. And we could solve using intersection point or algebra. We could tell you what the value of x was when y was a certain value. But what happens if we have a graph that has maybe a plot here, maybe a plot here, another one here, and we see that these plots kind of create a scatter plot, that they're not really in a perfectly straight line? Can we still use a linear equation to tell what x will be at a certain y value, or what y will be at a certain x value? Can we still use our data to make a prediction? And the answer is, of course we can. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the graphing calculator to enter all of these data plots. So we will enter each one of these plots into our calculator, and hopefully our calculator is going to do all this work and it's going to come up with a regression equation. Now the regression equation will probably have a lot of decimals, but it's going to try to figure out what is the best line that would fit all of these plots. And if I were to just kind of guess one, I would say some kind of line like this maybe. You see this line is close to pretty much all the plot. It's not really ignoring any of the plots. So this line has an equation. And the calculator is going to show me exactly what that equation is. It might say something like, oh, this line has a slope of 3.417 and an intercept of 10.98. I'm just making these numbers up. It's going to be something very specific because it needs to take into account the average of all these plots, how they relate to this line that it's coming up with. And we're going to call this our regression equation. And so it is a linear equation. It still has a slope, a coefficient x, and it still has an intercept. And it still has a constant rate of change. The equation does. Now what does regression mean? It's kind of a weird word. Regression is just a word that it's a word we use when we have lots of plots, scattered plots. So our regression is kind of like, is there a pattern? Regression means, do we have a pattern with all these plots? And hopefully we could kind of see, yeah, there was a pattern that this was kind of going upward. Even though they weren't perfectly lined up like previous linear equations, these scatter plots were all kind of going upward. And we were to take a guess of what our x value out here would be. Hopefully we can use our line to still say, oh, it would be this y out here. Because that's the trend of our plots. They seem like they were going out that way. So that's regression. It's the pattern. And analysis just means figuring out what the pattern is. So here's our regression equation. And the fun part about this unit is we get to kind of collect data. We're going to collect some data that we're going to put into a graph and then create our own regression equations that we can use to make predictions. So there you have it. There's regression analysis, and that's Unit 1C for this year. Well, that's it, and I'll see you in class. Now for a word from our sponsor, Papercut Games. Today's game, Magic the Gathering. Alright, now this is one of my favorite games. It's one of the most popular and successful games of all times. I've been playing it since I was 12 years old. So in this game, you're actually going to have these different cards, and there are literally millions of these cards that they've made. And the cool part about this game is you actually buy these cards individually or in packs, and then you build your own deck of cards. You build your deck of cards to do whatever you want. So like I have this deck here that has lots of goblins. And there's all different types of ways you can build your deck. There's goblins and knights and wizards and soldiers and banshees. And so you can build them however you want. There's 5 different ways you can build. You can build white cards. You can build green cards. You can build red cards, blue cards, and black cards, and they each have different kind of themes of what they do. But you build the deck, and then you play someone else, and they have their own deck, and the two of you fight each other with these cards, and they all have like attack powers and spells, and the goal is to deal 20 points of damage to your opponent to win. So there's lots that goes on in this game. But another cool part about the game is that it's so popular that there's also people who like to trade them. So there's a huge collecting aspect to this game. You don't just play, you collect the cards. And I keep mine in this binder because some of them are really nice and they're really powerful and people like to see them. So it's kind of a cool, it's like trading baseball cards, but they're Magic cards. But not only do you get to collect them and trade them, but then you play with them as well. So it's really, it's a huge game, and if you get into Magic, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. Maybe borrow a deck from someone who has some cards and check it out and see if you like it before you get into it, because it can be quite expensive. That's it. That's Magic the Gathering. I'm Mr. Bigsby, and I approve this message.